Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 8/9, depending on how you do the count, of Today to Brunswick, Tomorrow the World. And Anecdotally, because just I thought of a tangent, and far be it from me to let a good tangent go unpassed. It's a bit akin the way we're doing this
Hmm.
podcasting thing, Dan, and anybody else who's out there. The way that I was married to a Korean woman for 17 years. My kid's mom is Korean, and the way that they count people's birth years in Korea is they give you credit for the year that you're sort of in utero, right?
Okay.
So when you're born, you don't start at year zero. You start at year one. So
Hmm.
you're already 1 year old when you come out. So, or sorry, I guess that is giving you credit for sort of the 9 months, you know,
Yeah,
year zero inside mom's stomach or whatever.
exactly. Yeah.
So, so that's sort of akin to what we've done with this numbering scheme. We are technically on our ninth episode, given that we started, you know, we started on episode zero as being our first. So
Exactly.
anyway,
Yeah.
completely tangential.
Yeah.
But
Might as well just make things a little more complicated.
just let's
Just
let's just
for the
let's
heck
just
of it.
let's just throw it down
Yeah.
right out of the gate. You know.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, Matt Stranick and Dan Hayward here with you as ever. Depending on regardless of how you do your numbering,
Yeah.
and it's always a pleasure. Dan, how's it been going, man? How are things?
Things are good. It was an interesting few weeks there since our last episode. I
Do tell. I think I know what you're referring to here, bud. But do tell.
well, well, in that time, my partner and I had our anniversary. My birthday was the next day. My job went on strike for a while. I ended up joining a picket line marching band for a few days
Wow.
there, because apparently I look like the kind of person that can pick up and swing a bass drum.
And
Uh,
you were doing the bass drum like.
well, it was pretty much what it was. It was the kick drum from this guy's personal drum kit that he just kind of rigged up
Okay.
a harness for, that I was carrying around and just hitting with, you know, some sort of mallet because he had an actual bass drum that he had borrowed from the cadet troop that he taught band to, and unfortunately, one of the insignias got shown on the news, and they weren't super excited about that. So he just brought his personal kick drum from home, and he's like, "Here, this is bass drum enough." And yeah, it just sort of recruited
So
me one of the days that I showed up at the picket line, and then that was just something to do for the time that I was out there.
wow,
Um,
that's really earning your strike pay, dude. That's
yeah,
the PSAC Atlantic, marching band. I wouldn't have
exactly.
thunk I wouldn't have
Yeah,
thunk it, dude. But
it
yeah,
uh,
that's
technically it was, I think, one of the highest paying musical, looking at even though the strike pay is strike pay, it's still one of the higher paying gigs that I think I've had.
as a paid musician, right? That's
Exactly, yeah.
man, that's that opens up so many other
Hmm.
tangents in my mind that I'm gonna fight him back. I'm gonna fight
Yeah.
him back. Like, for instance, how many punk musicians in Canada are even part of the Professional Music Association? Music Guild or
Mm.
whatever. You know, so can copyright laws, factor into these questions. I mean, I
Yeah.
just so many questions, but I guess that's neither hither nor yon. Uh, if you are still listening, which I trust that you are, I'm gonna stay positive here. Just let's we kind of got an interesting one here, Dan. It's sort of it lends itself to a bit of research on my part, which I mean
Mm.
I always do a bit of research, but I was pleasantly surprised by the rabbit holes that I went down just on the couple of hours leading up to this. So why
Yeah.
don't you just give us a bit of an overview about what we're on today, bud?
Well, this spun off from our last episode where we looked at artists, bands that maybe only ever put out one full length album.
Yeah.
And while I was looking into, sort of trying to put together my list for that, I was thinking of how many, sort of punk and hardcore bands only ever put out one record, and then thinking about how there were a bunch of ones that I really liked that all featured like, common musicians, and then another pick on my list featured somebody who I've been listening to their music in different projects for a couple of decades now. That I was just like, figured, hey, let's just talk about some artists that, we've enjoyed sort of over the arc of their career through different incarnations and sort of like in bands, maybe with some solo projects, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Totally. And, part of the way that we kind of handle the way that this episode or the way that this podcast comes together is, that I get a bizarre amount of enjoyment from doing the media element, like the website and the formatting of the notes and stuff to a degree, because it kind of overlaps with my career as an educator within the e-learning space a bit. And one of the metaphors that kind of came to my mind from this, I always try and get these kind of weird, ridiculous graphics to throw into the recording and the website. And there's going to be a lot of spiders in this one, a lot of webs, like a lot of webs, because these are people, creatures, musical creatures who, are part of these vast kind of networks within a scene and whatnot. So I don't know. I that just kind of what's stuck in my craw a bit there, and I just So the tangled webs that we weave, when we're engaged in this stuff, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, man. So why don't we just dive right into it? Who or whom or would be the first that you want to speak to here on your list, bud?
Well, the first I want to speak to is an artist that came up on the last episode, which is Jamie Moline, aka LP, who is, I guess, currently he is mostly known as one half of Run the Jewels.
They got this cool hand signal thing.
Yeah. But he's been part of a couple different, a few different groups. I've been listening to his music, I realize now, for 24 years.
Wow,
and
that's impressive.
He's been making music since 1992 or thereabouts. Like, I think he was like in high school or something when Company Flow, his first group, which is the first. It was the first project of his I got into, but I didn't get into them till like towards the tail end of their career, like in the late 90s. But Company Flow were based in New York. It was LP, another rapper named Big Juss, and a DJ named Mr. Len. Their motto that was like plastered on all their records was "independent as fuck," and they were one of the first kind of like hip hop artists that I knew of that was really sort of proudly trying to work outside like the major label system, and just like they had a real like, it was like what the Ramones were to like rock and roll, they were to like the elements of hip hop, because it was all just like really like super jank, almost like kind of like janky sounding, like like very obviously put together from like looped record sample kind of beats, mixed with like LP uses, like he's a keyboard player and like synth player a lot, so there's a lot of like sort of live synth and sort of stuff that he plays himself over top of a lot of it. But like Company Flow were just kind of like raw and gnarly, but like with really like intricate, like kind of like abstract lyrics for the most part. But they were just something like way outside the norm of most of what was happening in hip hop at that time. And in my notes, I tried to write up the story, like set the tone of the first time I heard them, which was driving around in a Jeep with my friend Sean, who was like a hip hop DJ from Florida who had to leave Florida on very short notice due to making a series of 1-inch buttons with burning Confederate flags that some of his neighbors weren't super stoked on in that area. So he took off to the West Coast, and I ended up living on his couch for a while when I first moved to Portland for a bit, or when I moved to Portland for a bit, sort of in 1999. And we were driving around through like the back alleys of Portland's industrial district because he wanted to like try and find like old fluorescent light fixtures and stuff in dumpsters to see if you could like sell them for scrap. But it was just like, you know, a hot day driving down these back alleys in this like gnarly industrial district, and just the most, it just seemed like the most abrasive music you could make while using like the basic elements of hip hop to me, and still having it, and it was this one song, Patriotism, that I'm putting in the notes. It's like one of the last songs they did that was just like, it blew my mind when I heard it. And then, like I said, they Company Flow lasted from 1992 till about 2000, and then LP went solo, started his own record label, Definitive Jux Records, and started doing a lot of production. Yeah, like he produced the Cannibal Ox record, and he released 3 solo albums over the course of 15 years, plus an instrumental jazz album with Matthew Shipp. And I think William Parker as well, like just some of the, like, you know, the cool New York jazz guys in the early 2000s.
Just because he was there.
Exactly, because he was there, and it's just like him playing like keyboards and synths with these dudes. And it's an album called High Water that's worth checking out as well. And then had a run every 5 years. He was putting out a solo album for a while, and then during that time started doing production for Killer Mike, who was more sort of from the Atlanta, like, Outcast adjacent kind of scene.
Okay.
And I believe they met up through Adult Swim, the like Cartoon Network offshoot. That's like, because they had friends that worked there or something, who were just like, you guys should hang out. And now they've had this, like, that was sort of the project of his that launched him sort of into the commercial sphere, I guess, in a lot of ways, after being like, but still, like, through, you know, like, I don't think they're on a major label still. Like, they've still mostly just been releasing stuff through like smaller labels and that. But yeah, like, unfortunately, Company Flow's one full-length album, Fun Crusher Plus, is totally out of print. You can find it on YouTube, but that's about it. And like maybe find a used copy somewhere, but it's like the label that was on, Raucous Records, ceased to exist a while back, and I don't think they were on very good terms with them when the label ended. So, you know,
a bit punk rock kind of in the
and not always the best way, but yes, definitely. And it's just cool. I don't know. Like I said, it's been cool watching LP's music kind of evolve from like it's still got like, a lot of it sounds like, you know, what they would listen to in like Blade Runner. You know, that's the best way I can think of it. Like, you know, what somebody that was like, you know, going out, you know, for a night on the town would listen to in like, you know, the Blade Runner universe or whatever. Like, right. It's but and also during the pandemic, I became a big fan of the 2 Minutes to Late Night YouTube channel, and nice. He's actually married to one of the producers who like create, you know, is behind most, you know, a lot of the content on that channel, which I thought was pretty cool, because it's like it's like that channel is very much like kind of like the comedy adjacent end of like the New York punk and hardcore scene, and then this person who's like an innovator in hip hop is just kind of like starts hanging out with those folks, which I think is pretty cool. Which is, I think that's how one of Beyonce's producers ended up on one of the 2 Minutes to Late Night tracks, but through that connection. But anyways, yeah. So LP is my first pick as somebody that's just, like I said, I've been a fan of the whole arc of his career. Oh yeah, and I did get to see him live once. He came here and played at Pop Explosion. Wow. And it was a pretty great show. Yeah, it was him, and it was basically two people on stage playing iPads, but they still made it entertaining, you know? Like, and yeah, he ended up like kind of like really trying to promote like the local artists that opened for him at that show too on his social media, just being like, hey, you should check out these guys Weirdo Click. I think they're really great. You know, they opened for me here in Halifax, you know. This is their music, which I thought was pretty cool of them. But anyways, yeah, that was my first pick.
Well, man, that's fantastic. And this sort of culminates, this whole episode sort of culminates a bit of the thought here, about how wherever, artists happen to be from, they are very much a product of their scenes. And, you figure that musicians tend to be, people who dive into their collaborations and their, quote unquote professional lives relatively early. I'm just kind of in the picks that I've got. Everybody, really started out as teenagers, which is consistent with, my experience, our experience in Fredericton, I think, during those years.
Yeah.
And just the constellation of characters, so it's like, like in Fredericton, right? So you'd have like, there was a period where you'd have like Lloyd Hansen's Thrash Peninsula, which is like, this jazz-ish, hard rock combo, at the same, coexisting, with whatever, like Eric Hill, like, doing like his, laptop, art at the, audio soundscapes and whatnot, overlap, selling vinyl to, the punk dirtbag kids hanging out at Officer Square who were, in those bands. So the story of any one scene is in a lot of ways the story of all or any scenes kind of writ large, right? The dynamics and it's cool, that to acknowledge that none of this stuff happens ever in a vacuum, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay, well, and I guess just in terms of the general thing, when I was kind of looking at mine, I mean, again, what I found here is like just in terms of the names that came to me, the first three names that I thought of for this list were all drummers. So, drummers of bands, and I think, and the more I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that. And a lot of cases, the drummers, just by looking at the Wikipedia stuff, it's like, they, in a lot of cases, were guitar players first, but then, a family member had a kit or something, and they just, by necessity, like, well, my hardcore band fell apart, so I'll advertise myself as a drummer just to kind of increase what I'm able to do, and thereby they became, the drummer in what turned out to be their major project. In terms of that, I'll kind of hold off on those names for just a moment, because the first name that I actually have on my list is like I thought of it last. I thought of it like on the way up to the shower after doing my notes. So I'm gonna just give a shout out to Tommy Stinson from the Replacements. The Replacements. Anybody who knows me, I mean, if there's people who are like really into Kiss, or like really like into, whatever, and can name like all the trivia and minutia. Like I'm that guy, and for me, the Replacements is that band. Like I've read all of the biography books that have come out. I got a coffee table book of photos underneath the thing on my coffee table. And Tommy Stinson started out, he was 11 years old when he started playing with Paul Westerberg and Chris Mars and his brother Bob, who were 18 and 19 at the time. So and again, he just kind of started playing bass because they just needed a bass player, and they were antisocial weirdos jamming in their mom in his mom's basement, and it's like, okay, like you're gonna be the bass player. I'm like, okay, and from there he's gone on. Apart from being like just this really, really dynamite punk musician in the Replacements for all the years that they were active touring and recording, about 9 or 10 years, including stints on major label as well as their local indie label.
Mhm.
And during the reunion that they had for a few years back in 2015-ish, besides that, he also, like on the utter opposite side of the spectrum, he was part of the Chinese Democracy era of Guns N' Roses. He was Axl's bass player for Guns N' Roses for longer than he was in the Replacements, because Duff McKagan, after the spaghetti incident, fell apart, and like Axl was the only GNR member, with copyright on the name, and just playing with this motley assortment of musicians. Tommy Stinson was in Los Angeles. He moved there after the Replacements ended, and he was playing in a couple of really good, solid punk bands that did not make any money. And so he was in a band called Perfect, which is really good. They put out an EP. He was in Bash and Pop, which is, again, this really awesome project with like 2 records out. 1 record initially, and then years and years later, he kind of reactivated it for another record. And those are all worth checking out in and of themselves. But he was like, he helped Axl Rose tell other musicians in his band what he wanted them to do in such a way that they wouldn't get alienated and quit. And he's the guy on record as like a songwriter and contributor to a bunch of songs on Chinese Democracy, which is the one record that he's been on, which I'll probably never listen to because what the flying fuck, and as well, he's also, because of his thing, he stepped up as a member of the band Soul Asylum, also from Minneapolis, when their bass player passed away, and they were going to continue recording. They had that hit "Runaway Train" back in the grunge explosion era. They have a couple of good records. They started as kind of a punk band.
Yeah, they're early. I've heard some of their early Runaway Train, that whole stuff. Like some of their stuff they did on Twin Tone that was I quite enjoyed.
Yeah, Twin Tone. They kind of got a reputation as being like Husker Du Jr. Kind of like younger, kind of following in their footsteps. And he's put out besides all of that, a couple of just individual albums under his own name, which are really good. And he has a new one coming out with his former brother-in-law or former uncle-in-law, some like older guy without any, published music credits, but a sound musician playing bass, and he's playing guitar as this sort of traveling folk duo called Cowboys and the Campfire. And they do stuff like playing backyards. If you give him enough money to, it's just this eclectic thing. And they have their first recorded album of music coming out later this month, actually. So he's just literally been all over the map. I don't know if he just needs the money that much or what, but so he was the last person I thought of for this episode, but the first one I have to kind of put down just in terms of stuff I've paid attention to since a very young age. So there we go.
All right.
Yeah, man. So who do you got for your second one?
My second one is one that, again, is sort of more from like the underground scene, I guess, and the punk rock end of things.
Yep.
Where, I got really into, say, around the mid 90s, I got really into Ebullition Records, like a lot of people I know.
Yeah, totally. Very good.
Yeah, and a lot of the one common factor of a lot of sort of that early mid 90s to early 2000s run of Ebullition Records was a musician named Sarah Kirsch from the Bay Area, who she originally started playing in bands in 1988, 89. She played in a pretty punk kind of band called the Skin Flutes, and then Fugazi really got big, and kind of blew everybody's mind. And she ended up starting a band, being part of a band called Fuel. Not to be confused with the major label band called Fuel that were on, like, I think like the Godzilla
I'm
1995
sorry.
soundtrack and that kind of thing.
I'm sorry, dude. I don't want to just jump in, but did you see? Do you follow the '90s hardcore cassette and CD and zine collection?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, I follow a bunch of those accounts.
Because the dude who owns Ebullition posted an account on Facebook of the whole Fuel versus Fuel saga.
Oh yeah, I saw that. That was one of the reasons. One of the things that, and the fact that
I was wondering if that was what compelled you to mention.
That was one of the that was one that, and the fact that Sarah Kirsch. I looked in the time in the entire arc of her career in music was in 15 different bands. There's a really nice tribute page to her on the Maximum Rock and Roll website that has a full list of them here. I'll list off all of her bands right now.
Okay, sure. Please do.
There was the Skin Flutes that were from 88 to 89. Then Fuel that was from 89 to 91. She played guitar on the first 15 7-inch, who were a pretty big deal in pop punk there for a while. Actually, yeah. Then she was in a band called Silver Bearing. Just in 1990, she was in Pinhead Gunpowder for the first 4 years. That was a band.
Wow,
they were around.
Really?
She was the second guitarist. Then she was in Sawhorse from 91 to 92, another Ebullition band, and Navio Forge, another Ebullition band. John Henry West.
I really like Pinhead Gunpowder.
16. Yeah, Pinhead Gunpowder are great. Yeah, they're. They're the sum of their parts is they're one of those, like, I was thinking of super groups as a possible topic for the future, and they were definitely a band that I would put as a super group for sure.
Totally.
But yeah, then Torches to Rome, who were around from 95 to 96. Bread and Circuits, the one band of hers I did get to see, who were from 98 to 99.
Very cool.
Then Please Inform, this is the Captain, this is a Hijack from 2000 to 2003. Colborn, which it was her doing another project with Aaron Comet Bus from Pinhead Gunpowder. That was apparently about it was a pop punk band themed around Russian philosophers or something like that. And then she had a band called Botterbrains from 2005 to 2010, and then her final musical project was the Mother Country Motherfuckers.
Wow.
Who were around from 2010 to 2012.
So a tribute page. Has she passed away then?
Yeah, she passed away in 2012. She had, I had to look, she had like a rare form of leukemia, or not, or it was a rare form of anemia that basically like means you will end up getting leukemia, usually if you have it. So yeah, she passed away in 2012, but you can actually find the Mother Country Motherfuckers album is available basically for free or whatever you want to donate on the Bandcamp page of Clean Plate Records, the label that put it out initially.
You mentioned that.
I'll put that in the notes. But yeah, good. There were and like Oliver. I don't want to say all of her bands sound the same, but they have like there was like you could see an arc of musical style of like not like super fast, but like really driving, kind of like. Yeah, kind of like not super screamy, but driving, like, I hate to say emotional, but you know what I mean? But still very punk. But, you know, through like her last few bands, she was starting to work in more like sort of like synthesizers and like samples and just like weird, like Mother Country Motherfuckers were really like they all had like weird costumes. It was almost like not quite the Residents, but almost like something like that Residents Devo kind of like, you know, like they would all be dressed all in white with white wigs and white masks, like white, like elderly masks on and stuff like, and it's really, and it was just one of those things that like, she was just in so many great bands that never really lasted for very long, that had some overlap in other people, but it was just kind of like, they would last long enough to put together like a 25-minute set. And then 20 of those songs would be on like a 12-inch that played at 45 RPM that got released on Ebullition or some label like that. And then move on to another project. Just kind of like, that's kind of what happens sometimes. Like you get people that'll, you know, some people like work under the same sort of alias with the same people for years and years and years. And some people are just like, oh, well, let's do this. Oh, you don't have time to do this anymore. You're moving away. All right. This person's in the band now, and now it's called this. And, we'll work in these elements instead. But just
Scene
like
stalwarts.
exactly. But like over that like sort of 20, 25 years or so that she was active in music, really like just put out so many like killer bands that even if they only had like one or two releases, there was some quality releases.
High quality on all of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like when I was thinking of like bands that only had one record, I almost put Bread and Circuits on there because they played I saw them play a show in Victoria that was one of my favorite shows of like that kind of era of that kind of scene of music. That it was Render Useless, another band from the Bay Area called former members of Alphonsine, who kind of had their singer had it was almost like the Hold Steady style vocals of just like
awesome.
Here's here's kind of an essay and kind of a short story, but it's over top of like a punk band.
Awesome. I like
and
it
then
already.
and then Bread and Circuits, then Submission Hold with all of their like peripheral musicians, like their violinist and like their flute player and all that stuff. And then headlining was this band Sea and Red, who had toured with some of Sarah's other bands in the past as well. They're from Holland. They had a couple records on Ebullition also, and like they're still going now. But they're the folks that were like, they all used to play in a band called Larm, that were basically the Minor Threat of Holland, or like the Minor Threat contemporaries playing that style of music in Holland at the time, who are now still like in their 60s, like currently playing as Sea and Red still, which is pretty awesome in its own right.
I would say.
But just like that show was just like of that really kind of like, like I'm going to hand out a lyric sheet before my set kind of era of punk rock. Like that was like just such an amazing show. Like just such a killer lineup. And there were people like, there was like a friend of mine from Newfoundland at the show and friends of mine from Alberta. It was in Victoria, but there were like friends of mine from Alberta and Newfoundland and like all these other parts of the country that just happened to be passing through. And they were at this like, part of the 400 or so people there to see all of these like, just some of the top tier bands of like a certain part of the punk scene. And it was just really cool. And like, Sarah Kirsch was a big part of that. So, and as well as a ton of other bands. So I'll link to that MRR tribute page that has the list of all the bands, as well as like, links to like her music and like other stuff people wrote about her and that, and just more info that's better put together than I possibly could in my notes as well. And then I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I mean, no, man, that's sick. And like really, again, just finding, some of these secondary sources that kind of appeals a bit to the academic-ish person in me with, it's like, why not use stuff? It's really, it's out there. And no, man, that's fantastic. I stood to be informed right there, and I was. So that's dope. So I guess I'm going to actually leapfrog a little bit around my list, because of your mention of Ebullition Records, I'm going to mention that I just found out this person's last name today. So whom I had previously just referred to as Matt from Shotmaker. Okay, Matt Deline, that's his name, and I had to like look something up to find that out. And we're talking now. So I was talking about drummers as kind of being, these utility players within the scene. He's one of this rare breed. He's one of these singing drummers. Okay, I don't know shit about music, musicianship generally, but to me, that looks really difficult. Like playing that instrument at a high level, and if you're in a punk band at a high speed, and still, doing what you need to vocalize. I mean, that just sounds to me like lunacy that people would do that. But that was so, you know, in Shopmaker. Shopmaker, as it turns out, was not his first band. There was a band, Herbal something. I'm gonna have to refer to that in my notes.
Oh God, I remember that, but I can't remember the name.
Okay, well, I'll just put in a quick because now I mentioned it. So Matt Deline Herbal, what? Herbal Scream. Okay, Herbal Scream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So based and these folks were in you know, some I thought they originated in Ottawa. I was wrong. They sort of went to Ottawa from, you know, some smaller community in southern Ontario, which, you know, that'll be in the notes. But you know, speaking of bands of, you know, with Association of Ebullition Records, because they were on in the Heart Attack number 10, the 12-inch vinyl that came out. You know, one of those comps, which it wasn't my first exposure to them, but I was aware of them at the same time as Crayon Club came out. And it seemed like just as soon as I became aware of them, basically they put out their second record on a slightly bigger label, on you know, the Mouseier Forget Me Not album. They put that on Trouble Man Records, Trouble Man Unlimited Records, which was the, I think, first like Titus Andronicus, who is still going.
Yeah.
Started out, you know, was on this American punk label of some renown. No longer in existence, regrettably, but it kind of shows you that they, like, within a very limited, you know, period of time, one of the members of Shopmaker, that is Matt, that I was looking up just through my research, he was like, yeah, I turned 16. I had my 16th birthday playing, you know, the Gilman place, you know, in San Francisco. So if you can imagine what that must have been like, I mean, that's pretty cool compared to what I was doing when I was 16. But yeah, so Matt Deline, he's also, you know, gone on to play in some other bands, as you say, of and from that era. So 30-Second Motion Picture, Three Penny Opera. I remember both of those, you know, from when I was living in Montreal for a summer, as being like part of just the record collection that was around when I was there in 2001-ish, you know, that was kicking around. And I remember thinking, man, these are all fantastic. I wish there was more of that. And Slow Parker, who I talked about kind of at length in the previous episode, and he's now gone on to something else now, which we call Dark Plains. So he's still active. He's still, you know, and he's a bit older than other members of Shopmaker at the time when they got started. He was in his early 20s. So based on what I can figure, he's probably in his late 40s or early 50s right now. And I saw a tagline in an article which sort of spoke to the various members of Shopmaker. You know, after some years, it kind of referred to him as Ottawa's Ian Mackay, which I kind of got a kick out of. So in terms of his presence, and you know, there's a bunch of bands that, like, you know, I haven't even mentioned, but if you go to his Discogs thing, there's like 15 entries for different projects that he's been involved in. So pretty substantial, and pretty low below the radar still of popular music of any kind. And you know, for Shopmaker, Three Penny Opera, 30-Second Motion Picture, I mean, those are all just sick in and of themselves, in my opinion. And I mean, I'm sure the current one is worth checking out as well. So the value of this show is for me being able to take a deeper dive on some of this stuff, and particularly with the theme of this episode. So Matt Deline, formerly of Shopmaker and a bunch of other wicked stuff, thank you for your service, pal. If you're listening, which I'm sure you're not, but you never know. So,
you know what? You've actually inspired me to take one of my alternates and put it into my main list.
Please
just
do.
It ties into your last pick.
Go ahead, sir.
Because one of the folks, I was like so indecisive with my list, trying to narrow it down to just 5 people that I could think
Okay.
of.
Yeah.
And one of the folks that I had initially considered, like, as maybe like a runner-up,
Yep.
was Yannick Lorraine, who actually was the person who ran Great American Steak Religion Records and put out the first couple of Shotmaker albums.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
Who he, besides running record labels, besides putting out records and being a graphic artist, he played in one of my favorite Canadian bands of all time, Union of Uranus.
I didn't know they were Canadian, man.
They were like, it was like folks from Quebec and folks from Ottawa kind of like meeting up, because Yannick Lorraine he's originally from Quebec City. He'd played in a band called Doublethink there for a little bit, then moved to Ottawa to go to art school in like the early 90s. While he was there, he helped start the house show venue 5 Arlington, which is where like I remember it was a big deal that Aldernaut from Fredericton played 5 Arlington when they were on tour, because
I was not aware of that. Yeah.
That was like where all the like cool, whenever like a cool like band from sort of that end of the punk or hardcore scene would come through Ottawa, that's usually where they would play, was at this house show venue. And that's like, when you look at like the old Shotmaker records that came out on Great American Steak Religion and that kind of stuff, that 5 Arlington is the mailing address for the label.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
But Uranus they only put out a few records. They put out a demo tape that I actually bought a copy of through Phil Clark's distro back in the day.
2%.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Then they put out a split 7-inch with, I think it's Immoral Squad, who are like a band from Quebec City. Then they put out their double 7-inch Disaster by Design, which is just like a perfect record for me. I mean, double 7-inch is kind of like a weird format.
Yeah.
To put something out, like it got reissued as a 10-inch, which is still like kind of, but like just even like the packaging, because like Yannick really put a lot, like I said, he's also a visual artist.
Yeah.
I know that he was like running a print shop for a while too, and just like all of the records that he put out on Great American Steak Religion, and even like the record label he runs currently, Feral Lord. There's a lot of care put into like the visual aspects of things, and like the Uranus double 7-inch had this really nice fold out cover, and like I was actually just thinking about that record the other day because the movie Laiolo came up. And
that is an intense movie.
There's a soundbite from Laiolo. I ended up watching that in my intro to Canadian film class that I took at UNB. Like around the time that I bought that double 7-inch and put it together, it's like there's a sample that's like Le Camelot crie dans le vide, and I can't remember what the rest of it is, but it's just like some angsty like bit of like French dial. It's from like the Word Tamer character, like some voiceover that he was doing, but it was just very like like hearing that like sampled and just like this really great, like just really intense heavy hardcore record was like really cool to me. And then in an interesting turn, just a surprising turn of events, Yannick ended up getting invited to move to Tennessee after Uranus broke up, moved to Tennessee and play guitar for another one of my favorite bands of that era and pretty much of all time, His Hero Is Gone.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah,
who were from,
I've heard of them.
Yeah. I was such a huge fan of theirs back in the day that I wore a bootleg shirt of theirs until it literally rotted off me pretty much. Like it just like there was much less, like there was not much shirt left to that shirt by the time I finally retired it. But they were just like, it was just like they just had this perfect mix of like speed and just like deep heaviness and like atmosphere and like just and like a melody that wasn't really present in a lot of heavier bands like that at the time. And His Hero Is Gone's original second guitarist ended up being asked to leave the band, I believe, in maybe a just like you're out of here kind of way. After their first album, 16 Counts of Arson was released. It's 15 Counts of Arson. And then Yannick ended up being invited to move to Tennessee from Ottawa.
Wow. So
To
that's kind of I don't know, a prestigious
yeah,
gig in a way.
and like
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the whole time he was just kind of like, just traveling long enough to like practice and learn songs and tour and then go back to Canada for a bit. And but yeah, he ended up playing on His Heroes Gone's next two albums, Monuments to Thieves, which is just like their second album is just like one of the, like it's a perfect record to me. Like
Okay.
just just like it's just, as far as like heavy music in general, it's just like one of my perfect records. Like my last band covered one of those songs off that album for like the entire time I was in that band.
Right on.
Or one of my last bands. Just like, yeah, like they were a big deal to me. And then they actually broke up. They broke up about a week before I was supposed to finally get to see them live.
Aww.
Or it was like on the tour. They broke up while on the tour that I was supposed to see a stop of.
While on tour.
While
we're not
on
making
tour.
any money, and we can't stand each other.
And it was just, it was mostly just issues with the bass player. Because the other sort of the core of the band, the core of the band is actually two siblings, Paul Burdett, who sang and played guitar, and Todd Burdett, who played drums. And Paul, Todd, and Yannick ended up just finding a new bass player and starting the band that sort of he spent the majority of his music career playing in, Tragedy, who were pretty much just like, it's like they took what His Heroes Gone did. They maybe like, I wouldn't say cleaned it up, but it's not everything's at as much of a breakneck speed, like they worked at a little more melody. I know Yannick is a big fan of like sort of.
Would you call it melodic hardcore then? Is that
I've heard the term that I've heard them described as is stadium crust. Because nice. they love an epic ringing out octave chord kind of thing. Okay. And like they just so many bands. It's like Uranus sort of set a template that like, pretty much entire subgenres kind of like borrowed from, and then His Heroes Gone kind of took, one of the best parts of that, and then, like there was a good period of time, probably from like 1998 to like easily like 2008, 2010, where there were just a ton of bands trying to rip off Tragedy and His Heroes Gone. Like, and like they're still, I guess they haven't really done much in say the last 5 years or so, but I know Yannick's still running his record label Feral Lord. And yeah, Tragedy, like they put out an album in 2018, and like, like they've been going for like, I think, like almost 2 decades now, which is pretty impressive. And really like I said, I was kind of bummed that His Heroes, they were this, and then my other runner-up, which was Dennis Lysen, formerly of Refused and International Noise Conspiracy, currently of Fake Names with Brian Baker.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, because not only it's in the same summer, His Heroes Gone broke up on the same tour that I was supposed to see them on, and then Refused broke up 48 hours before the show I was supposed to see them at.
Wow.
But anyways, yeah. Like I said, sort of a late addition, a late sort of substitution into my list was just based on sort of what you brought up, was Yannick Lorraine of Uranus and His Heroes Gone and Tragedy, and as well running Feral Lord Records and putting out just like a bunch of awesome like punk rock records, as well as playing on a bunch of them as well. He actually stayed with me, or ended up sleeping at like my apartment when I lived in Nelson, BC, because he was roadieing for another band from Portland called Remains of the Day, whose drummer would end up going on to play in Long Knife, who I talked about on a previous episode. And the whole time they were staying at the house, I was just like trying to make sure everything was nice for Yannick. Because I was like, I don't get starstruck often, but it was just like, this guy played on like, 2 of my absolute favorite records of an entire genre of music, like, and he's gonna sleep on my couch with my like weird black metal roommate, like hanging out, making everybody feel uncomfortable, and like,
That's the show that
like the show that the band he was roadieing for like wasn't very good either. And like I felt really bad about it, and just trying to like it was just like gotta make it nice for Yannick, you know, like gotta impress like the rock star sleeping on my couch.
Yeah.
Even though he was just kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. I guess we got a show and a nice, you know, Vancouver's tomorrow. That'll probably be better than this. Because yeah, they weren't even playing in Nelson; they were playing in Castlegar, which is like a mill town adjacent to Nelson, BC, and even more happening.
I've heard the Kootenays are abundant in wild, beautiful nature and culture. You know, of a certain variety is there
Yes.
to be had. But if you're looking at punk or independent rock music as being kind of a more urbanized genre, then you're probably going to have a bit of a hard sell, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But
anyways, so that was my pick.
Well, that's fantastic, man. That's you've helped lay out a lot of context. I was aware of and had enjoyed Union of Uranus. And I've heard This Hero Was Gone and Tragedy both without having really listened to either of them a whole lot. So I've actually jotted those down as worthy of trying to take ownership of some of that vinyl, such as it may exist out there once we're done with this call. So
yeah, I would say if you get a chance, pick up Monuments to Thieves by His Hero Is Gone. It's basically, it's kind of an unofficial concept album about like just all the shitty stuff in Memphis in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's a pretty great album. Like Weeds is the song that's like, if there was a hit single off that album, that would be it. Anyways, yeah.
Number one with a bullet. That
exactly.
One. Okay. Well, I'll have to check it out. That's sick, man. Thank you. Okay. Well, I think probably then just in the interest of expediency, and because it does kind of they kind of go together. It's it's kind of difficult to talk about one of these bands without talking about the other. I'm going to mention here Derek Grant, the drummer for the past 20 years with Alkaline Trio from Chicago. And I'm also going to mention Neil Hennessy, who's with the Lawrence Arms, also of Chicago. They both kind of entered, my awareness. I've known about them both for a while, but I got both into them in the midst of my divorce and my unemployment that I've been, just living through these past couple of years. They both resonated with me for whatever reason. And in both cases, the drummers are just really, they're both trios. So that's one thing that's unique about them. They both emerged from kind of Midwest hardcore in the 90s, where you're in a bunch of bands before, your main thing. And, you're like, so for Derek Grant, I mean, he's been in some bands like, and I'd heard of like through internet stuff, but like didn't, wasn't aware he was a part of it. So in addition to being like with Alkaline Trio, who have just been in the recording studio for their first album in 5 years, which is awesome. So thanks Blink 182 for kicking out Matt Skiba. Just thanks for giving that a bit more impetus there. But he was in some bands like there's this band sort of ska rock called Suicide Machines.
Oh yeah, I remember the Suicide Machines.
So that's like I wouldn't have necessarily thought to check them out, but I'd heard of them, and now because like literally today I found out that he's the drummer of record for them for a few years in the 90s when they would have been like quite good in their prime, really. So they're from Detroit, right? And another. And Walls of Jericho.
Walls of Jericho.
Female-fronted hardcore band from the 90s as well. Also from Detroit, as it turns out. So I mean that's just for the kind of ones that really kind of jumped out with him. I'm just trying to see if there's any others that I kind of noted down here that he was a part of. Let's see. Thoughts of Ian Esco, again, a hardcore band from Detroit. Speaking of, hardcore bands with absurdist names drawn from literature. So,
I know someone with a Thoughts of Ionesco tattoo.
wow. Well, I got a Lawrence Arms tattoo, like just this past, few months, out of respect for the Lawrence Arms, who, part of the same scene, Chicago-ish, and Chicago-ish. They're of Chicago. So this is Neil Hennessy. And again, this is just one of these guys where it's like I'm a fan of his major project, Lawrence Arms, but then just by checking out the Discogs and the other stuff. So, I mean, he's been in some bands associated with the Lawrence Arms, including the Falcon, which has, I mentioned them before, has two of the dudes from, Lawrence Arms, plus one of the guys from Alkaline Trio, plus on their last record that came out a few years back, they had Dave House from Philly, who's a punk veteran who's crafted out sort of an acoustic punk career over the past few years. He has a new record out this month, which I really have enjoyed. And as well as playing with Sundowner, Chris from, again, Lawrence Arms, doing kind of a solo singer thing, but, who do you want for the percussion and in multi-instrument? So it's a guy that you already have a really good musical vibe with. And it turns out he also, like, in addition just to that, he's now also playing as the drummer on tour with Joyce Manor. And also with Sparta, so like these are all pretty well-known projects. And if you're talking about like just a guy who, it's like, who knows a drummer that isn't a pain in the ass? Like, okay, this guy, right? So in addition to that, he's also producer and engineer with Atlas Studios in Chicago. So that he's just been on countless projects just as a producer and engineer, and he knows enough guitar. So Derek Grant, I mean, he also plays some guitar himself with outside of Alkaline Trio, and then Neil, he plays guitar. Like he subbed in for like Rise Against, and when the singer guitar guy broke his wrist, and he played guitar with I don't know, just like a friggin' some Good Charlotte. It's like, okay, like just to do that. So anyway, talking about people who are in demand within their things and with roots in 90s hardcore. Shout out to the drummers who make it all happen, really, because out of all the bands that you really need a tight, fast drummer, I mean, this is the genre, right? It's punk and hardcore. Really, you need it, and you need it to be good. So there, I got two in on one go there, Dan. That's
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll. So we don't take forever here. I'll just quickly run through my last two picks.
Yeah, sure.
One is one that I've actually, has come up on the show before. That is Steve McBean, who is currently plays in Black Mountain and Pink Mountain Tops, from Vancouver. But cool. He goes way back to his first band was Red Tide, who were kind of like a melodic hardcore band from Victoria in the mid '80s. Their drummer's name escapes me at the moment, but he was also the drummer in DOA for like it was the drummer from DOA that passed away in the fire in like the mid '90s or whatever. I'm trying to remember the guy's name, and I feel really terrible. It'll be in the notes. But anyways, Red Tide's discography ended up kind of being re-released after this guy passed. Anyways, he was in Red Tide. Then he was in a band called Mission of Christ, who were label mates of Offspring when Offspring were first starting out.
Wow.
And then played in a band called Gus, who were they were on they most of the releases were on No Means No's label, Wrong Records.
Really?
This was all while he was still based out of Victoria at the time.
Okay.
and and then they ended up putting out a split 7-inch with Gus from Florida on No Idea Records, which was one of the first.
That's who
That was
I
one of
thought
my
you were
first
referring
introductions to
to.
No Idea.
Okay.
And then
That's
I think Vancouver somehow ended up on No Idea's radar because they ended up putting out a record for a band called Spark Marker from Vancouver as well.
Spark Marker, man.
Yeah.
That's taking me back.
Which I thought was kind of wild that, like, this Florida label way back then was like all these, in a less internet intensive time where a lot of the time it would have to be like, hey, I met this band and I want to put out their record,
Well,
like that's how those connections made out most of that time. But anyways,
yeah.
So he was in Gus. Then he was in, after Gus, he was in the first band. He was in a band called Ex-Dead Teenager. That was the first of his projects that I got to see live.
Ex-Dead Teenager, okay.
Ex-Dead Teenager were kind of like, more like, kind of like that Drive Like Jehu, like kind of discordant guitar rock sound, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And they were working a little bit of keyboards into the mix as well towards the end. And then after Ex-Dead Teenager broke up, he started Jerk with a Bomb, who I talked about on the show previously, which then sort of grew into Black Mountain and Pink Mountaintops. And anyways, he's one of my favorite Canadian singer-songwriters of all time over all of his projects. Right. And then the other pick of mine was another artist I kind of ended up just listening to for the arc of their career, which is MF Doom, whose shirt I'm wearing right now.
Very cool.
Yes.
Very cool.
Who started out as a member of a group called KMD in the 80s with his brother, DJ Subrock. DJ Subrock was hit by a car when he was out walking across the street. Then MF Doom retired from music for a bit, came back in his, the persona he was most known for, wearing his iconic metal mask, but also put out albums under sort of in the character of one of the other monsters from the Godzilla movies. And like
in the character
as King Ghidorah for a couple records. And like, he did albums as sort of more of like a street level type character named Victor Vaughn for a bit, and then
who is the
collaborated
in the
he's and then also collaborated with folks like Madlib for Mad Villainy, which is kind of like his magnum opus album to a lot of people, and then Danger Mouse for Danger Doom, and then a series of his own kind of like self-produced albums that were like just kind of intense and sometimes really dark, sometimes really kind of like silly sounding, but like just very rudimentary loops, but intensely intricate rhymes. Like before recording the show, I was watching a video on YouTube where they were just showing the lyrics and color coding all of the internal rhyme schemes. And it was just like, it was like just like
if I were to get back in as an English teacher, I'm gonna.
And it's like it's the kind of thing that like he's like, the cliche of your favorite artist, favorite whatever, but he's literally like, those that are respected as some of like the top craftspeople in hip hop, have looked, they've. A lot of them have cited MF Doom as like one of the people they look to, and unfortunately, he got deported from the U.S. in 2010 because he was born in the UK and his parents moved to New York, but he apparently didn't have citizenship. When people were just being horrible, being more and more horribly anti-immigrant in the U.S.
He
ended up he went on tour to Europe and just wasn't able to get back into the country.
Dang.
So he ended up spending like the last decade of his life living in England.
I was gonna say he's passed away, right? He doesn't.
Yeah, he passed away just a couple years ago, actually. I think like just about almost 2 years ago now, because it was on Halloween and they announced it like New Year's.
From what, can I ask? I mean,
it was just like ongoing degenerating health conditions. Like he'd had like even sort of in his prime as MF Doom, he'd had like a lot of health. I'm not sure what issues, but he had like a couple of different health problems where like he couldn't always perform live. So as part of the character, he would sometimes send out like Doom bots
Oh my
that were
God.
like other
Are you-
artists that would like, it would be like you would get like another rapper show up in an MF Doom mask just
What?
doing MF Doom song, like lip syncing an MF Doom song. And it's like you never knew if you were gonna get the guy or one of his like evil duplicates, because you know Dr. Doom in the comics would occasionally send out robot duplicates.
That is
People thought they would defeated him, but and it just he just was able to say like, no, it's my character.
That overlaps
and
with
actually,
so many circles of nerddom. Oh my God.
One of my other one of the things I listened to a lot, or like a few times in preparing for this, was one of my other runner-ups for the list, Open Mike Eagle.
Okay.
He wrote a really great tribute song to MF Doom right after he passed, just not long after he passed, just called For Doom, where
Okay.
you know he's talking like for this as the song goes on, he's talking about sort of like what an inspiration he was, and you know how he like was sitting there trying to write the song, going through like this really kind of like having a hard time processing his grief, and then looking at this photo he had framed of MF Doom live that was like one of the things he enjoyed, like just as part of his decor, just looking at that for inspiration, and just having this nice, finally working through some of his grief, and then realizing that it was actually a photo from one of the shows where Doom didn't show up. And he's just kind of like, ever the villain. Haha, you got me.
I finished
that was like, that just kind of like, it was just like a nice little like tribute to just the artist and character, and just like, I don't know, he's like the Bret Hart of rap. Like,
yes. Wow.
Just like a one of the most respected technicians, I guess, in the course of his life. And had like I said, performed as himself, as different characters, collaborated with different people. Like from like the late 80s on to, pretty much around the time that he passed.
Wow.
And definitely worth checking out. I'll put in a few things in the notes.
Well, again, I mean, it's hard to use the internet as a music fan, even if you're not into like, hip hop especially, and not be aware of that guy in the mask. Like with all the articles in Pitchfork and whatever else, But no, man, that's sick. And just what you were sort of describing about his posthumous thing. I just finished reading this really awesome biography about Prince. Speaking of artists from Minneapolis, and like just the weirdness and myth that kind of surrounds him. And there was this one, journalist from, Minneapolis who got in, inside and actually got to kind of a straight friendship and straight, thing with him. And just some of the stuff like about persona and artisthood and who you were compared to, and especially I think for Black musicians, right? Like there's a whole other, aspect of it that we as like just privileged white dudes, who just, we're music aficionados, like can't even fathom, right? So, nah, man, Doom bots. I mean, that's freaking brilliant, just, right there. That's
like he just, like, that's like the way that his lyrics were put together were just, and it's like it would be over, sometimes over just like the most deceptively simple loops. His album Born Like This is probably one of my favorites of like his just straight up like Doom solo albums.
Okay.
And it gets pretty abrasive at times. The title track is built around like a Charles Bukowski poem, actually.
Really? No.
But there's one song on there called Gazillionaire where it's Doom rapping over, I think, 3 different instrumental, like 3 different sort of short instrumental tracks by Jay Dilla, the hip hop producer, sort of like one of the like just god tier hip hop producers, who's unfortunately passed away as well. And it's like Donuts was his instrumental, one of his final releases that he was literally working on his deathbed.
Wow.
And Doom did a song that was sort of took 3 of these short instrumental pieces and stuck them together and just put the most intensely intricate rhymes over top of them. That's just like, just one of my favorite just pieces of hip hop, full stop.
Wow.
That's like one of my favorite producers and favorite, lyricists, just, doing, sort of their things being done together at the highest level.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
No, man, that's really cool. And actually, the reference to the Charles Bukowski poem, I guess for my final thing here, before we, kind of wind it down, I'm just going to kind of steer back into the realm of punk rock by just giving a shout out to Chris Wallard from Hot Water Music. Hot Water Music, being, just such a major, Gainesville, No Idea, and Epitaph, and a bunch of other record labels. They're just like the quintessential good guys of punk, and from Gainesville, not just the home of No Idea, but home of Tom Petty as well. So from Tom Petty's hometown, you kind of growing up with that around you, and Wallard. I mean, so speaking of, punk tattoos, I've got the Lawrence Arms tattoo, but the year before I got the bird with the, from the Ship Thieves, which is like Wallard's, main gig that he does outside of Hot Water Music. And so in addition to Hot Water, which has been running for, 25 plus years at this point, in addition to that, Ship Thieves, like straight up, like any member of that band in terms of secondary projects or whatever. I mean, it's so good. It starts out with just this kind of, the first record is like folksy, alternative, kind of like very, very un-Hot Water Music-esque. But now by, the fourth record out or whatever it's been, it's just more strident, fast, hardcore punk. And it's just built around really intelligent lyrics and really thoughtful melodies. And, he's a guy that sort of brought Leatherface together, for them to sort of do the split on BYO Records that they did with Hot Water Music with Leatherface, which was the impetus for Leatherface coming back together after a bit of a hiatus. So, I mean, I think he deserves a lot of credit just for that.
Oh, for sure.
Because Leatherface is like one of my favorite bands, ever of all time. And then just in addition, to Ship Thieves and Hot Water Music, he's also been part of a couple of other, somewhat similar, but, still pretty cool projects. So, for instance, he's in Rumble Seat, which I enjoyed the hell out of. No Idea Records, and it was Chuck Reagan as well, and Chris. So Chuck and Chris, the two guitarists, the two singers, doing acoustic folk music, but still just strumming like no. And they had they had a female co-vocalist, on some of their tracks. They got sort of some 7 inches out from under them, and they had just this one really awesome 12-inch Rumble Seat is Dead that kind of came out after they ceased to be a project anymore. Another couple projects that were sort of as part of that era that he was involved in, the Blacktop Cadence, a record that had a female co-vocalist whose name I can't remember, but I will for the notes. And then as well, the Draft. So at one point, Hot Water Music went on a bit of a hiatus. So it's basically Hot Water Music minus Chuck Reagan, and with a local dude from Gainesville kind of stepping in to be part of that. So just somebody who really hasn't ever stopped making music and has been fortunate enough to, because of the stability, I guess, of Hot Water, being able to kind of keep things going on some other projects. So, and again, I just got such a respect for him as a musician. He's written some of my favorite songs. And I guess also, as far as it goes, he stepped away from Hot Water Music, from touring, due to basically medical levels of depression and anxiety. And he had to the point that he had to get medical treatment for it.
Okay.
and sort of adjust his life around it. And that's something that I've had to deal with. I've been on antidepressant, medication. I'm on it now, and I've been on it before. And I've had probably 3 instances of my life where, like, I had to stop what I was doing in my life in order to, deal with it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm much better now. But I mean, I somebody who's at his level, speaking to that on the public record, was just, it kind of adds, a lot things that you can relate to, right? Relatability
Exactly.
is big with me. But so I got a couple other runner-up kind of artists that I'd throw into the notes. I'll just put them on. I'll just name them now.
Yeah.
Steve Albini from Chicago, mainly because of his work as a producer, in addition to being in 3 pretty heavy punk bands, and then Dwayne Dennison from the Jesus Lizard, who you just you look at it, the stuff that he's done with Mike Patton under Tomahawk, as well as with the stuff he did with the Jesus Lizard. But then he's got like an equally long, and in fact longer, discography of just really bizarre one-off things that he's either put out himself or a friend of a friend put out for him or whatever. But we could probably go even deeper on this. We may have to do another episode.
For sure. Yeah, I just, my quick 2 runner-ups were, like I said, I'd mentioned briefly before, were Dennis Lysant from Refused, and International Noise Conspiracy and Invasion, and now currently Fake Names, whose album I've just been checking out.
They're really good. They're cool.
And it's wild because it's just like everybody from every old DC band, and then the guy from Refused. And then also, like I said, I'd also mentioned before, my other run-up was Open Mike Eagle, who not so much has had a bunch of different musical projects, but has just done a lot of different artistic things in general that I really respect. On top of his music, he's done, like, he had a TV series on Comedy Central with Baron Vaughn that was like where he tried to like bring folks, like MF Doom and that into this other space, doing like weird sketch comedy stuff, and then has like runs an entire podcast network, including one of my favorites that I got a lot of information from one of my other picks. He does a podcast series called What Had Happened Was, where each season he takes like a different sort of figure in hip hop and has them go through their discography episode by episode.
Oh, cool.
And the first season is Prince Paul, who produced the first few De La Soul albums, amongst a lot of other things. The second season was LP, and the third season was a guy named Dante Ross, who was part of the Beastie Boys' initial like punk rock crew, but ended up like helping sign A Tribe Called Quest and like Korn and like all these other artists, and like has this whole crazy Forrest Gump-esque journey through that era of like different parts of the New York scene. That's like a really interesting listen as well. So that was just like, I thought it was cool that just to have someone to have the mind to create this. He makes like really great, like, it's like what would be pop music in an alternate reality. It's the best way I can describe it. Like there's a world where he could be like a Drake or something, but instead he's writing these weird, like, almost like indie dream pop kind of, like, he has like a song built around like repurposing a broken social scene lyric, and like, just like a lot of like weird spacey self-produced stuff, but like really intensely like one of his albums is called Anime, Trauma, and Divorce. Which is pretty much sums up what his life was. His life leading up to that point. And it's just, like one of those, like, I really respect and will check out pretty much anything I see him do. So that was my other sort of runner up besides.
Well, that is fantastic. I really I've been pleasantly surprised at some of the stuff I've kind of just uncovered about some of my artists. Just through a couple of hours of focused internet research here. So I guess I would just say thanks for the opportunity.
No problem.
With this topic, and also, I mean, just I'm like I said, Union of Uranus' Heroes Gone in Tragedy. Like, this is going to be on my
Yeah.
midnight Googling it until I could buy it vinyl thing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Well,
All right.
it's been a slice, man. We're a
Yeah.
little bit long here, but that's more than okay. And I mean, really, it's more than okay. So,
Yeah.
I guess probably just thanks anybody who's checking this out. Whether you're checking it out for the first time, hopefully it's not the last. But we appreciate you, however you're finding this, and I'll just say my goodbye for now. It's always a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing you again pretty soon here.
All right. Yeah. I'm just gonna say, see you around.
Take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks.